Well, we basically are having the same conversation we had a few weeks ago, because you're not pushing it forward at all. You're relitigating something that's already the subject of an investigation.
I hear you, but actually